Warning, this video is intended for mature audiences only. Viewer discretion is advised. What's up, you guys? Welcome back to my channel. It's nice to see you guys again. For those of you joining me for the very first time today, allow me to introduce myself. My name is Kathyrenee, and I'm doing a little thing called Morbid Storytime and Makeup, where I talk about a true crime story and do my makeup at the same time. And I know this is a concept that other people are doing, but you're on my channel for a reason, and I know you like that tea. So without further ado, I'm gonna go ahead and straight to the point, but I do want to remind you guys to please subscribe to my channel. I would love to have you guys. And let's go ahead and get this started. But first, even though we look like this, we're still looking really cute. The story begins on November the 6th of 1989. 3 bodies were discovered. One body of a male was found slumped against a door. Another body of a young boy was found face down. The last body of a female was found naked and stabbed. All 3 bodies were later identified as William, Julie, and Sean Grissom. On August 26 of 1990, 2 nude female bodies were discovered. Both bodies were stabbed to death, and both bodies were later identified as Sonia Larson and Christina Powell. On August the 27th of 1990, a nude female mutilated body was discovered inside of a duplex apartment. The body was later identified as Christina Hoyt. And on August the 28th of 1990, 2 bodies were discovered, stabbed to death. They were both later identified as Tracy Pauls and Manuel Taboada. And just so you know, the bodies that were discovered in November, it was located in Shreveport, Louisiana. The bodies that were discovered in August were located in Gainesville, Florida. And I know that was a lot, but we're gonna go dig into a background here. Back in May 26th of 1954, Daniel, also known as Danny Rolling, was born to Claudia and James Rolling. This makes Danny a Gemini. Not that it matters, but I'm a girl that likes astrology, so leave me alone. Claudia was only 19 years old, and there was no specific age for James. James Rolling was a local police officer for the town of Shreveport, Louisiana. A little bit after Danny's birth, it was said that James was verbally abusive to Danny because James did not want any children. And Danny must have been 1 year and 6 months. And around this time, Danny was minding his business, learning how to crawl. And James didn't like the way that his son was crawling, so he beat Danny. On August the 15th of 1955, Claudia gave birth to a second son named Kevin. That would be Danny's brother. It was said that James was much more violent with Danny after Kevin's birth. Well, James, sounds like your pull-out game was weak. And then when Danny was 4 years old, Claudia grabbed the kids and left James. And then she left James because of the abuse. She stayed away for a good 6 months. And then she listened to what James had to say, and then she came back. Then when Danny was about 5 years old, a lot of things took place at that time. James tied up Danny about 6 times in a 6-month period. And in another instance, Danny tried to steal a candy bar, but he was caught by his parents and made to return to the store to apologize to the owner. There was an incident when James found a puppy while he was at work, and he took the puppy home. And Danny became very happy with the puppy. And according to Danny and the neighbors, James constantly beat the dog. He tortured the dog, and because of that, it resulted to the dog's death. And the dog unfortunately passed away in Danny's arms. I mean, poor thing to remember that as a child. And then there was a reported case of James refusing to show any type of affection to his son Danny. And James believed that hugging was sissy stuff, and he refused to show affection to his son. And I'm sorry, like, no matter, you know, female or male or however you identify yourself as, you need love as a child. You really do. Like, you need that. It doesn't matter for who it's from, but you need that kind of affection as a child. Because it really does. Like, if you think about it, it's going to affect you, like, in the long run as an adult. But then you guys will see and understand here why. And then when Danny was about 8 years old, the family were all living at Columbus, Georgia at that time. And then around that time, Claudia had left James again because of the violent behavior. I'm not sure how long the separation lasts, but it doesn't take them long to get back together again. And as they get back together again, they go ahead and move back to Shreveport, Louisiana. And, excuse me, and then Claudia had stated that Danny was suffering physical abuse at least once or twice a week from his father. Both Danny and Kevin were not allowed to have birthdays or holidays. When Danny was about 9 years old, Claudia suffered from a nervous breakdown, and Danny had failed the 3rd grade for repeatedly missing school due to illnesses. I mean, was he really missing school due to illnesses, or he missed school because he was badly hurt by his dad and he didn't want to see the bruises? And then school counselors described Danny as suffering from an inferiority complex with aggressive tendencies and poor impulse control. This sounds like learned behavior from his dad. And they had recommended Danny to receive counseling, and then unfortunately Danny never received help. Around this time, Claudia had left James again, but it only took about 2 weeks for her to go back to James again. And around that time, Danny began to use his artistic talent that he shared with his mom to create the world of his own. When Danny was around 10 years old, James was teaching Danny how to drive. It's kind of young, but then again, I don't know what the laws were back then. And then James slapped Danny and scolded him for not knowing how to use the clutch. And I'm sorry, if you're teaching someone how to do something, like, obviously you're gonna talk through it. I don't think he was a good teacher. And honestly, like, by the way that this is all sounding, I don't think James was not very patient, and I think that he was very uneducated in the sense that he doesn't know how to talk. All he does is freaking, beat the crap out of people. Poor Danny. I really feel bad for Danny and the family at this point. And then around this time, Danny had to repeat the 3rd grade. And I'm sorry to sound like a broken record, but Claudia leaves James for like the 100th time now. But this time, Danny was begging his mom to, leave for good this time and don't ever return back. I'm going to go ahead and cut the crease, so I'll be right back. So around this time, Danny was about 11 years old, and he had walked in on his parents arguing. Claudia had slit her wrist, and she locked herself in the bathroom. James knocked on the door, and I know what you guys are probably going to think. He's going to rescue her or, care for her. No, he does the opposite. He does not rescue her, and he continues to argue with Claudia instead of just, finding the solution. Daniel saw Claudia laid out on the bathroom floor as she was bleeding out, and she was later admitted to the hospital. And there was an instance where Danny tried to stop James from beating Claudia, and unfortunately, James was the one that ended up getting beat. Poor guy. Like, you're trying to defend your mom here and no progress there. Danny, I guess at one point, he got a guitar and he would sing his prayers. And then I guess around that time, he started to fantasize about violence in sadistic ways. and all of his fantasies were sexually violent. And around this time, he began drinking and began an alcohol problem. And Danny would either steal the alcohol or get it from friends. And then when Danny was about 12 years old, James beat Danny because he did not receive his haircut for school. And then as a result of that, James beat Danny. Well, yeah, he always beats him, poor kid. He beats him with the belt buckle and he shaves his head. And Danny went to school the next day and all the kids were just making fun of him. I mean, kids are really bad though. Like, kids are bad. They're freaking, you know, they say how it is. And it's like, we don't, and at that time, Danny was going through a lot. And they were just really mean to him. Poor kid. The kids would call him Sasquatch, Bigfoot. And I'm sorry, if as a kid, I wouldn't make fun of somebody that's bigger than me. Like, they can, you know, step on me. But then again, I'm a tiny little thing. I would make allies with the big tall person because they can defend you. I don't think these kids thought this one through. But anyways, it's been said that James found Danny drinking with a friend. Danny was dragged home by the neck and was thrown into jail for 2 weeks. I was trying to research the legal drinking age and then the drinking laws at that time. I'm not sure how accurate that information is, but James is a police officer and perhaps he put Danny in there to teach him a lesson. And there's not a lot of information on that. But going back to the story around that time, I guess Danny at that time was having enough and he had refused to speak to his mom. And he had grabbed a knapsack and ran away from home. And he has spent his first night away from home in the wilderness. And as that was going on, he was having fantasies of killing people and controlling them, and he was also masturbating to these fantasies. And living in the wilderness did not last very long with Danny, so he eventually returned home because of the hunger. And then when Danny was 13 years old, he and his brother Kevin were handcuffed together on the floor after not cutting the grass to James's liking. And he was kneeling on their lungs, and Danny was, you know, I guess begging for his life or pleading for his life, begging him to stop. And at that time, I mean, he was pretty young. Like, he was threatening suicide. Like, who at that age threatened suicide? And if you don't like how something's done, either you properly explain how you like it done, or you do it yourself, or you teach it. You know what I mean? Like, you can't. Yeah, you gotta either you teach somebody to do it, or you explain how to do it. It's either or. You can't. You know, nobody has a fucking crystal ball in front of them to figure out how it's done. Sorry. You gotta fucking explain. So around that time, or not around that time, Danny was 14 years old, and around that time, he was a peeping Tom, and he saw a naked girl for the very first time. And you know how boys are at this age, so he went back and he got caught twice. I couldn't say that. He got caught twice. Once by his neighbors and the other by his father. And he beat him, and I'm guessing it was a pretty bad beating because it had caused Danny to commit suicide. And Danny was not very successful in committing suicide at that time. And it's also said that around that time, Danny was having dreams of people beating them, torturing them, and he said that he was having demons go through him. And around that time, he was thrown out of his own home by his father because Danny asked if he could wear jeans to church. And I guess later on that evening, as a mom, Claudia let him return home, and she apparently had snuck him back inside of the home. And around Christmas time, Danny must have been about 15 years old. He had got a guitar and then taught himself how to play and write his own songs. And then he had a job at the Dairy Queen, but James made him quit due to his grades dropping, which that I totally understand. Like, I wouldn't want my child's grades to be dropped either. And then around that time, I guess Danny got more dark and more aggressive. And when he was about 17, he had joined the Air Force in the Lackland Air Force Base in Texas. And then he later worked as a security police in the Strategic Air Command at the Homestead Air Force Base in Florida. And around that time, he had been consuming acid and other drugs. And by the time that Danny was 18, he was locked up for the possession of drugs. And as a result of that, he rightfully lost his stripe in the Air Force. And a psychiatrist diagnosed him as having a personality disorder. So due to this, he was honorably discharged. And in 1973, Danny was 19 years old. He moved back to Shreveport, Louisiana with his granddad, and he had found religion at the Pentecostal church. Danny then was baptized, and he became much more involved in church activities. And then around that time, Danny had met Omatha and Halcomb. It's not really said when exactly they had met, but I'm assuming that they met at church or at one of the church activities. And there's not a lot of information on Omatha, but on September of 1974, Danny had married Omatha, and she fell pregnant around that time. And on 1975, Danny was around 21 years old, and Omatha had given birth to a baby girl named Kylie Danielle. Around that time, he was working about 2 jobs to support the family, and he had been feeling the pressure, and he began drinking and also using drugs again. And around that time, Danny had left the church, and he was acting extremely irrational. He would threaten Omatha's life, and that's when Omatha would become afraid of him. And then Danny would run off for hours, days, without telling Omatha anything. And when Danny was around 22 years old, he was claiming that he was seeing really weird things. And then the weird things that he was seeing were UFOs, demons, ghosts. He claimed that he had seen Jesus. And then there was an incident where Omatha called his parents when Danny just stopped going to work. And then James came over, and then he had put a knife to Danny's neck or throat. Danny was around 23 years old, and then he had caught Omatha having an affair with her ex-boyfriend, and then he threatened to kill her and her ex-boyfriend. Danny put a gun to Omatha's head, and when she said that she was going to leave him, Danny beat up Omatha's ex-boyfriend and then turned the gun on himself. She begged him to stop, and then Omatha then filed for divorce. Then after the divorce was finalized, I guess he took it really bad. Well, I don't know if he took it bad or not, because he ended up raping a woman that looked exactly and identical to Omwitha. And between 1978 and 1984, Danny was in and out of prison a lot. And in that same year of 1984, Danny was already 31 years old, and he had got into a motorcycle accident, and he was treated for a concussion, and he had nerve damage to his neck. And it is said that there is a link between serial killers and head trauma. And after that incident, up until 1989, he was committing robberies, and he was in and out of prison a lot. And in that same year of 1989, Danny was 35 years old, and early November, Danny was fired from his job. And his boss had claimed to have missed 3 days of work. Danny was confronted about it, and then he exploded. He was enraged, and then he threatened to kill the manager and the cook. And on November the 6th of 1989, that's when the 3 bodies in Shreveport were found. Julie Grissom, age of 24, Tom Grissom, and her nephew, age of 8. Julie had her body mutilated, cleaned, and posed. And then the medical examiner estimated the death to be 2 days prior that Danny had lost his job. And on May 18th of 1990, Danny was about 36 years old, and he had gotten into a fight with James, and then Danny shot James twice, one in the forehead and one in the stomach. Somehow James had survived, but he had lost an eye and he had lost an ear. Alright, so we're going to take a quick break. I'm going to go ahead and do my liner, and I'll be right back, you guys. So we are back, and I kind of forgot where we left off. I know that Danny shot James twice, one in the forehead. Okay, so I forgot where. Okay, so moving on. During that time, Danny had continued a life of theft, and on August the 24th, that's when the tragic event happened. Danny broke into the house of 2 college female freshmen with an automatic pistol and a knife. The first victim was Sonia Larson. He covered her mouth with duct tape and stabbed her to death. He then goes on to Christina Powell. He taped Christina's mouth and bound her hands. He removed her clothes, and he was touching her very inappropriately. And he forced Christina to perform oral sex on him, and then he raped her and stabbed her 5 times. He killed her. And then he returned to Sonia's bodies and was performing necrophilia, which is doing sexual acts, sexual things to a lifeless body. He then fled the apartment, throwing all of the evidence into a dumpster. On May the 25th of 1990, Danny killed Christina Hoyt. He beheaded her body, set the body upright at the edge of the bed. He sliced off her nipples and laid them beside her. He also, I don't know if the right word is, he decapitated her, he beheaded her. Somehow her head was not attached to her body anymore. And he placed it, on display on a shelf. So you know very well that he was getting a kick out of that. And on August the 27th of 1990, Danny broke into the apartment of Tracy Pauls and Manuel Taboada. and he killed them both. There were no mutilations to the bodies, but the experts said that he may have been interrupted, and they had suspected a man by the name of Edward Humphrey, only because he had scars on his face and he had a history of mental illness. And they had tested his DNA, compared it to the scene, and they found that it wasn't a match. So eventually they let him go. And due to these unfortunate events, University of Florida allowed the students to leave after 2 weeks. And on September of 1990, Daniel was arrested for robbery. And on September the 12th of 1990, before anything was discovered, the name of like the killer was given, and it was given the name of the Gainesville Ripper. And on January of 1981, there was a discovery that hadn't been made. Like, DNA was like brand new around that time, and they linked the Shreveport murders and also the Gainesville murders together. And on November of 1991, while Danny was serving his time, his DNA was used for the testing, and it linked Danny to the Shreveport and the Gainesville murders. And in June of 1992, Danny was charged with the Gainesville murders. And in that same month, he began to exchange letters with Sandra London from prison. And Sandra London is a very controversial woman. She's an American true crime author, and Danny had contacted Sandra to quote unquote tell his story, which I don't know why. Like, okay, look, you had a fucked up childhood, yeah, but it wasn't okay for you to do all those things. That's the story. But anyways, some time has passed, and when they were exchanging the letters, and Danny got really personal with her and told her how he really felt about her. And according to Sonia, she says that the feelings were mutual, but the priority was the book that she was writing about Danny's crimes. And they were trying to arrange a visit, but the prison would deny it. And then the prison stated that the quote-unquote friendship wasn't leading to marriage, and eventually Sonia and Danny had agreed to marry in order to have their visits. And they had announced their engagement in February of 1993. And in August 1993, they began to write Making of a Serial Killer. And in February of 1994, Danny pled guilty to all of the 5 murder charges. And in March of 1994, the jury recommended 5 death sentences. Like, I'm happy that he got like charged 5 times, but what about so the 5 was the Gainesville ones, but what about the other 3 in Shreveport? Like, whatever. Like, he got the death sentence, but I feel like he should have been charged for that as well. But anyways, back to the story. In March of 1994, the jury recommended 5 death sentences. The book of Making a Serial Killer was published on January the 1st of 1996, and October the 25th of 2006, he was executed by lethal injection. And it was said that he was singing in his final moments of his life. His last meal was a lobster tail, and it is said that this case was a high-profile case, It was a high-profile execution since Ted Bundy. And Danny's mother, Claudia, passed away in 1995 after losing her battle to cancer. And James eventually passed away in December of 2012 at the age of 81, and there's not a lot of information about his brother Kevin Rowling. I just hope that he decided to leave all of this behind him and start a better life only for himself. And I didn't find a lot of information on Omatha and the daughter of Kylie. I just hope that they were able to live their lives and put all of this behind them. And unfortunately, like the story of Danny Rowling was an inspiration for Kevin Williamson. And Kevin Williamson is a screenplay writer, and he wrote the screenplay for the movie Scream. And if you guys don't know, Scream is an American horror slasher film. And within the franchise, Scream, or Ghostface, was born. And because the franchise was such a success, it was a big hit, they ended up making 6 films. And they have a new film coming out soon, I think. And I tried to find out on how the victim's family feel about like the franchise, but I had no luck there. But that is the story of Danny Rowling. I'm gonna go ahead and finish my makeup. Excuse me, I don't know what's going on with my throat. I'm gonna go ahead and finish my makeup, and then we'll come back. And I just realized I left the fan on and my little fan on, so I'm so sorry for like all the back noise that you just heard right now. I'm back. And that, ladies and gentlemen, or however you identify yourself as, was the morbid story of Danny Rowling. I mean, there's not much to say after that. I feel bad about his upbringing, and I feel bad for his head injury, because maybe the head injury triggered everything, or maybe it was just his upbringing too. I don't know. And I feel bad that when they were advised that he needed help, no one took initiative for help. I mean, could it all have been prevented? I don't know. But it's just a sad story, really. Like, I feel really bad for the victims as well. I feel bad that the victims in Shreveport did not get like their justice, but I don't know. But anyways, that was the case. I'm thinking about like the Scream franchise, and honestly, I remember looking at that as a little girl, and it was pretty cool, not gonna lie to you. And then the Ghostface is legendary to this day. But I do feel bad that that story came from an actual murder. Supposedly, it said that in one of the scenes, like, oh, my boyfriend's gonna get you, something like that, that it was an actual scene. I'm not really sure how accurate that is.
He's big and he plays football, and he'll kick the shit out of you! I'm getting scared.
But anyways, I know this new Scream movie is supposed to come out soon. I'll watch it. I haven't watched the new ones though, but I remember the old school ones. They hit home. Like home as in like, you know, old school home. But anyways, I hope you guys have a good rest of your day. I'm sorry that this story made you a little sad or made you feel a type of way that's not happy, but I just wanted to bring awareness of what's going on. And also, nobody really talks about Danny Rowling. But yeah, I know I'm not the first. But I will see you guys on the next Morbid Storytime. Stay morbid.